Kong in the trunk. King Kong, King Kong.
I'm back. Rhodes Rants with the continuation of the video podcast series on horror movies. As you know, we have started this series with a countdown of my favorite horror franchise, the Friday the 13th franchise. This was requested also by a Patreon of mine, Kyle. Thank you, Kyle. Make sure, check my Patreon out. Shoot me $1 a month if you feel like it. Or my GoFundMe, which is a tip jar for the channel. This video will probably get monetized. Unfortunately, it'll probably get like a quarter of the views that my political videos do. But, hey, honestly, these podcast series have become my favorite videos on the channel to do. They're completely informal, and I get to get on here and just informally rant and rave and talk about these movies and the processes behind it, around it, and give you some history on film if you don't know about it. This movie was released May 9th, 1980, and Sean S. Cunningham produced and directed it. He came to the idea to create this movie because he was inspired by the success of Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween. And those two movies would be responsible for launching a slew of horror movies built around holidays. April Fool's Day, My Bloody Valentine, and I mean a ton of other ones. Mother's Day. I mean, there's just a slew. And they were also responsible for starting the slasher movement, what's called the slasher films, a whole subgenre of horror that really and truly, we call it a subgenre, but they're probably the biggest horror movies ever. You know, I mean, you could give a nod to Poltergeist and some of those kind of movies. But for a two-decade period, horror movies were slasher movies. Basically. Jason, Michael, Freddy, Leatherface, they ruled the planet of horror for 20 years. They did. And at times, the remake, I don't like to call it a remake, reboot of Friday, reboot of Chainsaw, reboot of Halloween, regardless of how you feel about those movies, they all made bank. The Halloween that came out last year made monstrous bank. Monster bank. Now, I recently got to see, I watched another documentary about these films, and I did not realize this, but Sean S. Cunningham was saying this first movie by itself, when you tally in things like cable syndication rights, VHS, DVD, box sets, original theatrical releases, everything. This movie was made on $550,000, and it has grossed almost $1 billion by itself for the franchise. I could not believe that. I was like, wow. Almost $1 billion by itself. It was shocking. Not the franchise, this one film. Unbelievable. And of course, famously, this first film, Jason Voorhees was not the killer in this film. It was his mommy, Pamela Voorhees, played by a great television character actress from time way gone by. I mean, this movie was made 40 years ago. We passed the 40th anniversary back in May of the release. She's phenomenal in this. She is. I said that when I made these periodically throughout the franchise, you would see somebody that went on to become a huge celebrity later. And this one has the biggest celebrity of them all for the franchise, Kevin Bacon. He was in this movie. That's him at the bottom corner of the screen. He gets an arrow from the underside of his bed through his throat. It comes up, moves around a little bit, blood squirts out. And those effects were done by the legendary, and in my opinion, the undisputed king of makeup designer horror effects, the great Tom Savini. If you don't know who Tom Savini is, if you watch From Dusk Till Dawn from Robert Rodriguez that has George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino in it, there's a character in From Dusk Till Dawn named Sex Machine. Well, that is the great Tom Savini. Tom Savini also, as we know at the end of this movie, when the dust settles, Jason comes up out of the lake to make an appearance. So he created Jason, and he originally came back in the final chapter to do what he thought was going to be in Jason. Everybody thought that. Everybody thought it was over with the final chapter. Now, Cunningham was saying that there's a lot of... he was having trouble getting financing for this movie. He almost gave up. And there were some people that he had done business with out of, I think, Boston. A group of guys. They had other businesses. I don't know what. When I was researching this and I was watching there's two major documentaries on this franchise. When I've watched those documentaries, I mean, it's kind of ambiguous as to what exactly their other businesses might have been. Tony Soprano. But I don't know. But he got financing. They made this movie. The screenplay, this was written by Victor Miller. And that's the reason it's in lawsuit hell right now. Because after so many years, rights can change hands just because of time lapse. And what has happened is you have one person that's claiming rights to Jason Voorhees, another one is claiming rights to the Friday the 13th franchise. And they're fighting it out right now, and that's why we can't get any damn movies. And after they release a massively huge game, people can't get any new content for the game because it's locked down right now in lawsuit, which was supposed to be over this month, but COVID. Now, you might be like, Rhodes, you've got the original way down at 8. Yes. Look, this is my favorite horror franchise, but Jason, okay? I am a fan of the character Jason Voorhees. All right? Now, I can say this is about the Voorhees family, and Jason makes that little cameo at the end, but we still don't know if that is a dream sequence or what that's supposed to be exactly. And Cunningham has always left that up sort of to the audience to determine. Okay. Really good performances in this, particularly from Betsy Palmer, who did a really good job, and Andrea King, who played Alice, who is the heroine of the movie, and she lives to the bitter end. And this movie has the famous scene that has always been interpreted as Jason watched his mother be beheaded. Well, she was beheaded in this movie in a great effect scene from Tom Savini. And famously, there's a story when her head's cut off, and it's a great effect, especially for 1980. You see her hands twitch like this. That is not Betsy Palmer's hands or a female's hands. That is some dude from the set. Because, in fact, if you look really close, he's got hairy-ass arms. So that's pretty funny, right? That's pretty funny. One of those side tidbit stories about these movies, you know. Also, Jason was originally going to eventually be named Josh. I'm glad they didn't go there. For whatever reason, maybe it's just the fact that it's been Jason this whole time. but Josh Voorhees just doesn't have the same ring to it as Jason Voorhees, okay? So, and if you're wondering why, I don't know if I even said this at the beginning, but if you're wondering why I'm not paying that much attention to the camera, it's because being a video podcast, that's the point. Now, they're informal conversations about these films. Now, an interesting note on this film, Sean Cunningham had this idea for this movie, and he said, I'm going to call it Friday the 13th. I want to see if there's any interest in this. Just gauge interest, period. That's it. So he took a ad out in Variety or the Hollywood Reporter. I think it was Variety. And it was the poster, not this poster, a different one. And it says Friday the 13th, coming to a theater near you. He hadn't wrote it, nothing. Just the title. And he said he started getting calls. This sounds interesting. When is this coming out? What's going on? What's the whatever? Well, we're still figuring it out, but he found out very quickly there is interest in this title. There's interest in it. And that's when he started looking for financing. And of course, the movie starts out in 1958. 2 camp counselors are killed at the beginning of the movie. And we find out later on in the movie, after much POV shooting, we don't know who the killer is for the longest time until Alice is the only person left alive. And then a Jeep pulls up, and out Betsy Palmer comes out, Pamela Voorhees. And you realize pretty quickly she's crazier than a shithouse rat. What she does wonderfully is play a mother who has lost a son. I have firsthand experience with that because I've got a brother that died in an accident in '83, and I firsthand saw what that does to a mother, particularly in the first, let's say, decade after it happens. And that was an accident, okay? But you can see how that affects a mother. And so to have her character know that her son drowned due to neglect of humans, she's crazy, she knows it, and she doesn't give a shit. And she plays it wonderfully. There's a scene in this, in case you're wondering, where there's a snake in a cabin. And I'm sure you've seen the movie and you're like, did they kill a snake? Because we know there's regulations against that. They don't harm animals in movies. No, in this movie they killed a real snake on camera. Sure did. They've talked about that. Some of the actresses on the set did not appreciate that being done to said snake. I am Indiana Jones when it comes to snakes. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Fuck that snake, okay? I don't like snakes, period. So, to hell with that snake, and I don't have a problem with the fact that snake met its demise in this movie. Of course, Harry Manfredi came up with the infamous music score for this in this original movie. He also came up with the that is so famous with Jason and Friday the 13th movies. And would go on to have various variations depending on the film. Now, the one thing I'll say about the first 4 films, once you get past the first 4 films, these movies kind of become a horror popcorn adventure. They're super fun. You have a great time. You have a great time watching these. But the first 4 still had a true element of horror, of terror, of suspense, of what's going to happen. It wasn't mindless slaughtering. It was, I mean, there was still subtleties in these movies that made them creepy. That made them creepy. You might be like, why isn't this higher on your list? I know I will get that on this. There's a slew of people, I promise you, they believe this is their best one, and that's certainly your priority, or your prerogative, your opinion. I'm a Jason Voorhees fan. Jason is not the killer in this movie, but I've got it as high as number 8 because the movie is just really good. And my phone randomly started playing right in the middle of this podcast, but it's gone so well, I'm not going to edit that out. So, I've got this movie. Look, this movie is substantially better than the 4 behind it. It is. Now, I gave Jason Goes to Hell a 5 out of 10 because there were things I thought were great in that movie. And then there was that body jumping scenario that, I mean, you had things that I believe were a 9 or 10 out of 10 in that movie, and then a narrative in it with the body jumping that was a 0 out of 10. So at the end of the day, I came up with a 5 out of 10. Now for this, I'd probably give it something more in the neighborhood of about a 6.5 out of 10. Okay, and you know, I'm taking off because the lack of Jason. Look, I understand Jason wasn't supposed to be in this movie. Of course, he has the cameo at the end that nobody really knows if that's a dream sequence or whatever. Sean's always left that up to the public. Think what you want to think. Ma'am, we didn't find any boy. Sheriff, at the end. Then he's still out there. Probably. Probably. Flat probably. In fact, we find out later, yes, exactly, he was still out there. But do I believe that was Jason? No. Jason's in the woods. He wasn't in the lake. He was in the woods. So, yeah, Jason's around during this film somewhere in the lore of Friday the 13th, out in the woods. Now, the theory would be that his mother didn't actually know he was alive still, obviously, and in the woods. He's been in the woods out there living, you know. And, of course, the premises of all this killing in these movies is the idea that, you know, Jason's really just defending his turf. You know, he is defending his home turf. You came to Crystal Lake. I didn't go to Texas. Jason didn't go to Texas. Same thing with his mother. You're opening a Camp Blood, that doesn't need to be opened again. I'm here to kill you all and prevent it from opening because she doesn't want the same thing that happened to Jason happen to other kids. Again, a mother. And there's something creepy about that. There is. There's something understandable about it. And Betsy Palmer has said when she goes to these, you know, there's huge Comic-Cons built around horror movies. And she has said when she goes to cons, mothers and parents love her. And she's asked them, why in the world would you love somebody like her who hurt these people? And they tell her, as mothers and fathers, we feel like we can understand why you were so angry and vengeful. Okay, so parents' love for their children, that's the narrative. So her character absolutely resonated and is totally relatable to a lot of people out there. That's a big deal. That's a huge deal when creating a successful movie, is there a character that some people, I didn't latch on to her character, but her character is a driving force for Jason. Right? But other people absolutely understand where that character is coming from. Drink break. So, Rhodes Squadron, 6.5 out of 10. A lot of the ancillary characters, nothing to write home about. I mean, Kevin Bacon's character, nothing to write home about. You could tell the kid, he did stand out compared to the other ancillary characters. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention Crazy Ralph. Ralph rides a bike around town, even all the way out to the camp, and he warns people not to go to the camp. Don't go to the camp. It's got a death curse. Creepy as hell. And Ralph is around. He hangs around. First movie, second movie. And we'll get to the second movie. All right, we're at number 8. We got 7 more of these bad boys to go. And some of these are going to bunch up ratings-wise. Kind of like the previous 3 did. They sort of bunched up ratings-wise. There was 1 point difference between Jason Takes Manhattan and Jason Goes to Hell. Now you got 2.5 points difference between Jason Takes Manhattan and the original Friday the 13th. And this movie's considerably better than Jason Takes Manhattan. Jason or no Jason. Look, they could have got a lot. If they would have further explored some of that mythology from, like, Jason Goes to Hell, that Voorhees family stuff, which we'll talk about in later videos because some of it relates to later films, they could have got a lot of traction out of Jason and the family. There could have been some fascinating stories written around that. Also, in case you're wondering, you might be like, why are there 12 films? Well, technically speaking, you've got Freddy versus Jason, which will be a part of this countdown. I actually tend to believe it's a little bit more of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but I still count it, and I still like it. But we'll talk about how I view that movie when we get there. So, but yeah, that's why they're 12, because I've got Freddy versus Jason in this entire ranking. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button. I love to do these podcasts. God, I wish they got more views, because look, if they got more views, a lot of my videos, even my political videos, would be built around a podcast format, because they're so informal, but I can really just let go, sit back, talk about. But it's hard for a lot of people who won't watch longer videos. And that's the problem with building around that format. So, 6.5 out of 10. Your takeaways are Betsy Palmer as Pamela Voorhees, great performance. Andrea King as Alice, really, really good performance. Ancillary characters, not so great, not big standouts. The movie still had a very, very creepy tone. It felt very much still like a horror movie as opposed to a popcorn movie later on that some of these movies would have. But look, I like popcorn movies too, and they're fun. And this wasn't as fun as the entries that are ahead of it. Peace. I'm out. Till next time.
King Kong in the trunk. King Kong, King Kong, King Kong.